Right. So we are now at neuroeconomics. Okay. If you remember, we started at classical economics. Then we went on to discuss behavioral economics and how that sort of comes into picture. And now today, for the last class, we touch a bit about neuroeconomics. It's also justified to do neuroeconomics just for one class because this is a very new field. It's really an infant field, and yet it does have it's opening up these doors to answer a lot of these questions and to fill a lot of gaps. And which is why I felt it was important and it was sort of appropriate thing that ties all the knots together. So before I continue, what do you think neuroeconomics sort of means? What do you think it's about? What do you think it's trying to do? Anyone could answer.
Maybe looking at like the individual and what they're thinking of when they make decisions.
Why do you think they put the word neuro then?
I think neuro has to do with the brain, if I'm thinking correctly.
Yeah. So then try and join the dots. What do you think neuroeconomics is doing then? What is it a study of?
Maybe how a person acts in like the economic field, how it affects them.
Okay. All right. So you sort of got it. Let's discuss. So essentially what neuroeconomics does is neuroeconomics tries to link economics, psychology, and neuroscience to ensure that we have a better understanding of economic decision making. If you remember, these are the three Venn diagrams we began with, the first session. Okay, it was an intersection of economics, psychology, and mathematics. But now what is happening is we've added this entirely new discipline to the lot. And it would be right to sort of make it an intersection of to sort of write, yeah. Okay, we have more people joining. Yeah. So now it has become an intersection of more than just three things. And neuroscience is added to the mix in order to provide greater insights for economic decision making. Now, as Asian said, neuroscience is the study of your cognitive features, your the biology of the brain, and how is that working. It's involved with a lot of what are um, what are things that are triggering the neuron firings that's there. So, for based on my understanding, and I'm not a biology student, um, right? Based on my understanding, when you take decisions, right, then neurons essentially fire up. So they say that the brain um, is like an electric circuit also. All right. So all these neurons are sort of they mimic the sort of energies that electricity has. So neurons fire up whenever you're taking decisions, and the interrelations between how which neurons fire up and in what circumstances, that sort of together corresponds to this study of neuroscience. Now how does it relate to economic decision making, right? You're studying the workings of the brain, fair enough, that's probably for a biology major. How am I as an economist concerned about what is happening in the brain? Now what happens is neuroeconomics helps us understand the animal and human brains. And why it's important to understand is because our brains are the ones that are taking these decisions. So if you can understand the biology, if you can understand what situation triggered what reaction in your neurons, in your brain, then you can possibly understand how are you taking the decisions that you are taking, why are you taking the decisions you're taking, and what is the biological mechanism of it. Till now, the classical economist and the behavioral economist, they're merely theories of observation. That is to say that we observe that, okay, some people tend to do this, and hence this is a theory. We're creating a theory of your behavior. Okay. For classical economics, it's a theory of ideal circumstances, right? If people behaved this way, everything would be perfect. The economic agents in our world will be at perfect equilibrium. That's essentially what the theories have been. Why is neuroeconomics so monumental? Because it's filling in the gaps. It's filling in the gaps that are unanswered by conventional and behavioral economics. And it's providing these gaps with a scientific biological backing. If I say you are, let's say you abide, that framing effects affect you because your neurons are interpreting the written text in a particular manner. So it's no longer psychological, just psychological, but you also find a biological reason for it, which is why it's very very important to understand the sort of evolution that this could lead to. And this is very very new, the entire discipline, which is why a lot of content that we'll probably be discussing is preliminary in nature. But yes, it's important because, and you can study, there are people who study chimpanzees and rats and all of those things also, right? How do they take decisions? So human brains and understanding human brains and the economic decisions is the next big thing. This is why neuroeconomics is important. It can also help us predict the future of economics. Imagine that you can understand what is going on in people's brain, and you can ensure that, okay, this is how people will take decisions. It's scary and awesome at the same time. Okay, now what are certain methods, or what are neuroeconomic research focusing on? All right, so this is probably getting a little heavy for people here, but essentially what they do is, so I'll make it very like easy. Have you seen, if people have heard of fMRIs, that's functional magnetic resonance system. So it's essentially that it helps you to do brain scans. What are certain areas of your brain that light up due to a particular decision? Okay, all of these things. So imagine that um, there are two individuals, and both of you are under the fMRI machine. All right, so your brain scans are now visible to the researcher. Now what the researchers do is they provide you with different choices. Okay, suppose between Coke or Pepsi, it's a research, and these MNCs want to understand what impacts consumers and which product are they choosing. And they give you Coke and Pepsi, and then they see and they observe what are areas of your brain that are lighting up when you choose Coke, when you choose Pepsi. Okay, and on these results they build their hypotheses, they make inferences, and they create a control group. So essentially a control group is a particular group which is not subjected to the intervention. So if you are asked to just choose between Coke and Pepsi, there will be a friend who wouldn't be asked to do anything. Their fMRI will just be done after, let's say, an hour. A pre-fMRI and a post-MRI. That's all. So they become a control group. So what they do is they compare choices between the treatment group and the control subjects. And then they see that what were the different changes that took place in your brain, and try to build hypotheses from that. Okay. So essentially, these are three accepted mechanisms that people are using for in this field. I've already spoken about MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging. The other thing is positron emission tomography. I don't want to go into details of this because that's very heavy neuroscience, and I am not um, qualified enough to be talking about that. The third is blood and saliva tests. Now, how are saliva tests might be peculiar to think about when you're talking about neuroeconomics, but it's essentially how are your salivating glands and how they react to particular decisions. So it's very counterintuitive, also something that you'd probably not think could help researchers analyze the decisions you are making. Imagine choosing between a blue shirt and a red shirt. How are your uh, saliva glands actually reacting to it? You'd probably think there's no correlation. And yet neuroeconomics does rely on these sort of indicators that we have a tendency to show for. All right. So, okay, are there any questions with respect to how neuroeconomics is working, or why is neuroeconomics important, something of that sort? No questions? Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, so what are fields, what are areas in economics, right, which are troubling for us? What are those gaps that neuroeconomics is filling? The first one that we have is social decision making. Okay, now social decision making is essentially corresponds to game theory, and game theory is something we covered in this class. Why is it called social decision making? Because this is in correlation and in cooperation with other actors. In game theory, you're always in acting with respect to another actor, right? Always two actors or more. There can definitely be more actors involved in a particular game position. And so it helps us understand the social decision making we are doing. When we spoke about behavioral economics, we spoke about social norms and its impact on our decision making. Okay, all of these things help. All of these things can now be codified using neuroeconomics. So understanding how your brain is reacting when you're talking about things like fairness. Okay, if I have $10, if I have $10 and I have the power to share a bit of those $10 with you, okay. If you reject, this is a sort of thought experiment. Okay, I have $10 and we have to divide it equally between the two of us. Okay, but if you deny the deal that I propose, then neither of us get the $10. Okay, here. So now, in this scenario, if I'm the first person who's getting the money, all right, then I can probably do a $9 division for myself and give you a $1. Okay. But because the deal is not fair, you will not accept that deal. And if you don't accept that deal, I also don't get the $9 that I'm supposed to get. Okay. If I find a video for this thought experiment, I'll send it across. But this thought experiment essentially shows how important it is for people, um, for human beings, this entire ideal of fairness and reciprocity. Okay, that if you are doing me wrong, then you should also not be getting anything. And it's fine to not get anything than to get a deal that is unfair. Okay, $1 is still more than $0, right? But because the 9:1 division is unfair, I choose to not accept the deal because unfairness is a problem for me. And all of these psychometric sort of variables that's there, which can't be measured in a quantifiable manner, right? How do you measure fairness? Can you plot fairness? Is fairness a linear curve? Is it an exponential curve? You can't plot these things. You can't plot the fairness that I exhibit as an individual versus what you exhibit as an individual, or how much importance it is reciprocity contain in your life. That if I'm doing something for you, you should be reciprocating those feelings in one way or the other, or the favor, whatever. All right, reciprocity can also occur in different scenarios. But these are social decision making factors, and so neuroeconomics helps us understand how our brain is functioning in these scenarios, right? But then my question is, and I don't know much. I don't know, right? I don't know the right answer to this. But my question is that does doesn't my brain function differently from your brain? In the sense that if all the decisions that I make are different from all the decisions that you've making throughout your life, then if this researchers study me, they'll get a different sort of analysis, right? They'll probably get different inferences about what Ananya does, or how does Ananya's brain react when we talk about fairness. Maybe someone else who doesn't care about fairness, their brain wouldn't react the same way. What do we do then? Can we make neuroeconomics the benchmark, the standard for all people again? Because all theories need to be able to be generalized, right? You need a theory that can be generalized. It can't be that, okay, 18-year-old female living in India, only this is the demographic to which our analysis would correspond to. That's not how you can make a theory, right? Okay. The second part is decision making under risk and uncertainty. This is also something we covered, right? Which is when you're choosing alternatives where outcomes are fixed but the probabilities aren't, or you don't know about the outcomes and their probabilities, right? So you don't know what is the probability distribution that you may or may not get. Okay. Now what happens in this scenario is, again, all of these ideas. So imagine this, right? All the effects and analysis we've had of behavioral economics, you are now proving it through a scientific manner. So if we spoke about decision making under risk and uncertainty, we spoke about loss aversion and how in certain scenarios people are risk averse. They run away from risk. They don't like risk, and in some situations, they are risk seeking. That in some cases they're willing to bet a greater deal. You remember the Ally and the Ellsberg paradox, right? Where some people were willing to bet on an extra 1% of sudden death, just because on a whole it doesn't really matter, right? So in that scenario, we became risk seeking. But what happened in your brain at that moment? And when so many people, even in this class, chose that particular decision, what took place in your brain? And can understanding that brain processes help us understand decisions that human beings take on a larger scale? Maybe how the stock markets are running. Okay, why are people reacting to Elon Musk's tweet and buying cryptocurrencies, even though they know that cryptocurrencies are probably the most volatile asset type on the market today? What is happening in their brains? And we will, if we can analyze and understand the biology for all of these people, or for a representative sample, and create theories of it, it's, frankly speaking, it's very cool for me, right? You've now understood our brain. The brain is no longer a black box that is beyond comprehension. We are understanding it more and more. There are different parts of the brain, prefrontal cortex, that's responsible for certain decisions, other things, right? I'm not a neurobiology student either, so I won't go into the detail of that. But that is essentially what it is. Now, this is a live example. Again, this is by Daniel Kahneman. He's sort of a really huge figure in this field, right? That's probably sort of apparent to most people here. Now, what he says and what he talks, so this is, again, it's mentioned in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he mentions this idea that your pupils dilate when you are working on something that requires cognitive effort. Okay, which is why he poses this problem to us. Face a mirror and look at your eyes. Invent a math problem that's difficult. 81 times 17, right? Probably a lot of mental effort. And try to solve the problem and watch your pupils at the same time. And almost everyone is able to observe pupillary dilation that accompanies mental effort. So what Daniel Kahneman suggests is that pupils, our eyes, are a gateway to understand the cognitive effort that we are putting in for a particular task. The more effort you're putting into a particular task, the more dilated your pupils will be. This entire field is called pupillatory research, of how pupils can be used as an indicator for a lot of different things, a lot of things that your brain is doing or how you're reacting, right? I mean, a common example would be also understanding that pupillary dilation is a common phenomena to emotional responses. If you meet someone you like, okay, if, let's say, there's something that's something very upsetting that happens, all of these things. So while this field already existed, right, the research was limited, and now with research coming up, saying that, pupil dilation can be related to cognitive effort that you are making. It acts as a gateway to your brain. So you can actually see and you can notice it yourself. So I will also try this, whether you can see that your pupils are dilating if you're making the effort. And if you do get to read the book, right, by him, Thinking Fast and Slow, he also mentions this, that while he was doing the study with his wherever he was doing the study, right, the respondents, the moment they stopped putting in effort, their pupils came back to normal. So you could see on the basis of the size of the pupil whether people were still working on a given problem or that they had mentally given up on the task. And that is the sort of insight that simply pupil dilation was able to give us, and how the brain was functioning. And if the brain is functioning in a particular manner, that gives us insights into what are, let's say, the decisions that they are doing. What is the point where you take the decision that 81 times 17 is a too difficult question and I can't simply put in the effort? And your pupils will answer that before you physically answer it. So, I mean, it's a pretty cool example, which is why I put it here. And you should definitely try it out. You should try it out with people around you. And if you can actually notice the size of the pupil changing. So yeah, you see, this is how essentially pupil dilation works. It reflects the load of tasks. So again, since pupil dilation is correlated with mental effort, the greater the mental effort, the greater will be the pupil dilation. Okay. Now, neuroeconomics was essentially a very small part, right? But what are questions that we have for neuroeconomics? And I've encouraged everyone here to ask questions, maybe possibly try and find the answers for these questions. And today the questions that we have for neuroeconomics is, it is a evolving field, right? And we don't know a lot of things about it, how it will venture out, and all of these things about, can these studies be generalized to the entire population? Are our biology same enough to ensure to build theories about that this is how your brain will function if you've taken this decision? Can that extent of generalization be done? Okay. The second is if we can replicate these lab studies to real life scenarios. In the lab, giving a 81 into 17 question is easy, and being able to notice that pupil dilation is easy. But what about experiments where you're choosing Coke and Pepsi, but in a lab environment? How are you replicating these things in a real life scenario and replicating the inferences that you're getting from these studies in real life scenarios, right? So, for example, the samples we've been doing, right? The behavioral economic samples that we did yesterday. People here had a sort of like a 50-50 division between the choices, right? Even 50-50 divisions between in the decoy effect. Okay. But this essentially, this setup, it becomes a lab experiment of sort. Why? Because you know that this is the decision making class, and you know that your decisions are at test currently. But in real life scenarios, are you putting in the mental effort to think about this? You might have chosen the medium tub or the small tub when I asked you about the decoy effect. But what are you doing when you actually go to the movie halls? So is there enough space for us to replicate these lab studies to real life scenarios that are representative enough of our decisions? All right. And the third sort of also tends towards a philosophical question, right? The third is, if our decisions can be predicted or replicated, do we have free will? Free will is a huge discussion in philosophy, right? Whether everything is determined for us, whether we write our own future, um, what is the purpose, how much free will do we have, all of these things, all of these ideas, right? I mean, there's who am I to say, who am I to tell you about what are arguments in free will? And so, if you can study my brain and if you can tell me the kind of decisions that I will take in a particular scenario, which means that you have predicted the decisions that I will take in a particular scenario. And if you can predict the decisions that I make in a particular scenario, aren't those decisions predetermined for me? And if those decisions are predetermined for me, then do I have free will to make a choice, to make the choice that I want to make? Okay. Are there any comments or suggestions or um, any pointers with respect to this? Are questions for neuroeconomics? No one? Are people sleeping? If that's so, we can just like wrap up the class. So,
No questions still now.
what do you think about the idea? What do you think about neuroeconomics?
I think it is pretty cool that you can understand how a brain is functioning. Like, know how people are thinking differently about particular scenarios. But at the same time, as you said, the third question, like if every decision is like predicted or replicated, and you already know that this is going to be your decision, and when you are trying to again make a choice between in that scenario, I think when you know that this is already predetermined, and you feel like you're being, it's like, I don't know, I feel like controlled is the word. Like something is happening and then you're like, oh, this has already happened, so you know what I'm gonna do. Okay, that's it. So I think in that way it is, like I don't know, pretty congesting. But studying about the brain and knowing how people take decisions, how the brains work, how they're thinking, I think that is really cool.
There it is. Anyone else who would like to add on their ideas and their understanding of neuroeconomics? All right. So this was the bulk of the class. Now I just want to take a second to review um, our journey and a recap of all the things that we've covered here and how now looking back you can probably correlate it in a more comprehensive manner, understand all the things we've covered and why it was important to cover all of these things in order to understand decision theory. Okay. We started with classical economics. We started with understanding the definitions of rationality that have been proposed. Okay. We did indifference curves in consumer theory, which was very, very microeconomics. And if you study microeconomics in an academic atmosphere in your school or first year of college, this is exactly what you'll be taught. And the reason why it's important to discuss that even here, even though it was probably very academic, something I wouldn't have liked covering, but it was important to cover because till the time you don't know the foundations that we're trying to question, you can't question them. So we did consumer theory. We did what does classical economics see about human beings being rational, utility maximizing individuals who work in their self-interest. And these became a key ingredients for most of the lecture series, right? That human beings are supposed to be rational, they're supposed to work in their self-interest. And anytime you're deviating from these assumptions, right, your decisions would be termed as irrational. Okay. So we did all of these quantitative models. We also did game theory, right? So we did game theory of how you are interacting with others and how you are interacting in a scenario where you work in a strategic manner to take decisions that again maximize your utility. But you take into consideration that the other person the second player or your opponent is also a rational being who is out there to maximize their utility. And in those scenarios, what are strategic decisions you make? Decisions that are optimized. All right. And we understood it and we questioned it. We said, is it taking into consideration ideas like maybe my friend and I are extremely tight and I would not rat on them. What then? Game theory would break down. So all of these ideas and all of these questions came about. We questioned the fact if we have perfect information all the time. Are we aware of all the factors that are impacting the decisions that I'm making? Am I aware of all the, let's say, competitors providing a particular product, right? Am I doing that research? Rational consumer theory and rational choice theory will say that you should be weighing in all your options. You should be looking at 5 different sellers, the quality and the prices that they are providing. And yet, as humans, we often take decisions in a hurry with incomplete information because we don't want to put in the effort. Humans, as difficult as it might be to accept, are probably very lazy individuals, right? And so we move on to behavioral economics. What does behavioral economics do? It provides a term to every flaw that classical economics has. Okay, you're lazy, you don't want to put in the cognitive effort involved because there's a mental effort involved, you don't do these things. Okay, if you have to take a decision, you probably go with things that are free, you probably go with things that your friends are doing, you follow herd behavior. Okay, you act under social norms. If you see other people reacting in a particular manner to a particular scenario, you would abide by these. Okay, you're also impacted by different cognitive and psychological effects that impact you in different ways, right? Like framing effects, because the way a particular scenario is framed is impacting the perception that you are having of that scenario. You can be influenced to choose one thing or the other. And we saw how it plugs and sort of accepts all the flaws that classical economics has. We realize that, okay, we do not put in the effort. We realize that there are mental shortcuts that we use. Okay, for certain things, I will probably choose the one that I find the most convenient. Okay, that requires the least effort. And we discussed paradoxes, right? And Ally paradox and Ellsberg paradoxes were the first were one of the earliest paradoxes to be accepted by classical economics, but they called it a paradox. They called it an exception to the rule. And then behavioral economics started justifying everything. And the number of exceptions to classical economics merely increased, and it's still increasing, right? We spoke about Ally paradox and all of these things. They can actually be justified by loss aversion. That the behavior and the tendencies you're having is that you want to minimize your losses, even though if I was to plot it out in a logical manner, the cost benefit analysis is probably same between the two choices. The video that we saw for Ally paradox. Right? So even though A, B, C, D, the choices between A and D were absolutely identical, we did flip our choices. And that's because of how it was framed. That's because of the fact that as human beings, we want to reduce the risk that we involve ourselves to. Which brings us to decision making under risk and uncertainty, where we spoke about probability. We spoke about how probability helps us analyze what decisions to take under risk and uncertainty. And most of our decisions are taken in a risk and uncertainty with incomplete information. For behavioral economics, we summarized by talking about nudge. Okay, we've understood that classical economics is there. It's already used on a micro and a macro level. How is behavioral economics impacting and changing us? How is this new knowledge impacting our social interactions? They're using it now in social policy. Okay, nudging people to act in a particular manner by realizing the fact that there are certain biases and heuristics that people use. certain limitations that they have to their cognitive and psychological abilities. The fact that opt-in and an opt-out would lead to a 75% change in organ donations in countries, simply because we don't want to put in the mental effort and that we tend to stick to the status quo, that we are impacted by inertia. Okay, that was behavioral economics, and that corresponded to decision making on individual levels, talking about consumerism and how companies are using these biases, how we spoke about Netflix, cinema halls, and even Starbucks and its anchoring effects, Apple and how it gets how it retains the loyal audience that it does. And we spoke about behavioral economics on a macro level when we spoke about its public policy uses and opportunities in the future. Okay. Finally, we spoke about neuroeconomics today. And how neuroeconomics, it's still very infant, that's why most of the content is very less. But what neuroeconomics is doing is the questions that we ask behavioral economics, right? That are you considering psychological factors? Is being irrational really bad? What neuroeconomics, the way I see it, neuroeconomics has the potential to make it biological, right? That I'm not irrational, this is just how our brain works. And if it's how our brain works, then acting in a particular manner isn't necessarily irrational. It's again, it's just human, and that is what neuroeconomics could do. There is also an entire field of neuromarketing, since again economics and decision making correlates a lot to neuromarketing in the 21st century of capitalism and consumerism and of buying more things than you can afford. And neuromarketing does similar things. So the Coke and Pepsi example is a study that's actually been done, and it was done to test the loyalty that people had to a particular brand and how did the brain react, and what are components of why their brain reacted the way they reacted. Because let's say they recognized Coca-Cola more, or they had a certain brand value image attached to Coca-Cola, which is why their brain areas probably lit up more than they did for Pepsi, even if on an average more people chose Pepsi over Coke. So all of these are analysis of decision making. What are factors that are impacting our decision making? And even today, this is an incomplete field. It's ever growing, and decisions are involved in the smallest of things. My decision and the opportunity cost of spending an hour taking this class is a decision I have taken. It is having an opportunity cost of all the other things that I could do. And yet, why did I choose to take this class? Okay, what were my motivations? What is my incentive for taking this class? Why am I doing it? Or even simple decisions like what shirt you chose to wear today. If you've seen, they talk about the fact that Mark Zuckerberg always wears the same shirt because it reduces the mental effort required to choosing a new shirt to wear every day. And those are things because that's also a decision you have to make, and it will require effort. If you want to save that effort, sure, buy the same shirt. So all of this, so understanding the decisions that you are making and the incentives, motivations behind it is just very important, right? And then if you think that you've taken a bad decision, you can question yourself for it. Or if you're supposed to take an important decision, you map yourself out. You see all the factors, you weigh these factors. So we realize that no discipline is set in stone. It's evolving. And it has to evolve because it is a field that concerns dynamic and complex individuals, right? I mean, how human beings take decisions today is probably not similar to the general ideas and decisions taken 100 years ago. You might be similar in some psychological sense, but there's still evolution, constant evolution of thought and ideals. So the theory can't remain the same, it has to evolve. And so it's important for you to explore, read more. If this is a field that intrigues you, please read more. There's a lot of content, a lot of TED Talks, YouTube videos that actually talk about these things. Question whatever you read. all of these things, I am no expert, and I have no degree that makes me qualified enough. And yet I am questioning everything that I'm teaching here. And that's because it's important to question whatever you're reading. School will tell you this is what there is. Study, know everything. This is the end game. This is the final word. But it really isn't. And it doesn't have to be unless you make it the end word. So question everything, right? And then weigh in the pros and cons and decide what you want to believe in. What is making the most sense to you? Ideate over these ideas. Where are areas where you think that neuroeconomics could change the world? Okay, maybe that's a field you can explore. Maybe you can explore how behavior change is important for all the other problems that we are having. Behavior change for encouraging people not to throw trash, encouraging people to. They say that the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan done in India was actually modeled on behavioral economics, that the government actually used these ideals and these policies, that you use social norm to make open defecation a taboo. And because the people who were defecating in the open, they were, treated as outcast, social norms and the fact that you still want to remain in your community and you want to be accepted by your community is important, is why people stopped open defecation. And this is what these are again what articles and what studies are saying. But it is true. And Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, I mean, it's debatable what sort of impact it's had, but it's a real policy example that people accept. The World Bank has started mentioning things like behavioral economics. The Economic Survey for India in 1718 had an entire chapter um, on the frameworks of behavioral economics that can now be used in policy making. How can you use behavioral economics to encourage tax compliance? India is one of the countries with the least amount of people who are actually paying the taxes that they're supposed to. So how do you encourage tax compliance? You encourage people, you provide them with frequent reminders. Okay, you tell them that your friends and families have paid taxes. Have you? Okay, all of these things, frequent reminders, social norms, make providing easy portals so that the um, mental effort that people have to put to actually pay their taxes is least. So you're removing all of these resistance and you're removing all of these barriers. And you credit it to behavioral economics because that's helped us understand the barriers to the decisions that people are taking, why people are making the decisions that they make. And that's essentially the conclusion for this class. And pretty much we have 5 minutes left. So I was successfully able to talk for 45 minutes and share my philosophy for the class. But yes, that's essentially it. That summarizes the sort of journey for decision theory. And we can discuss something if you want to, other ideas and anything.
Oh, could I just ask, like, what book was it that you recommended for us to read about behavioral economics?
So there are essentially three books, and Gia has provided these books and the links in the summary PDFs also that we've been sending. The three main books that sort of encompass the uh, most of the bulk of the literature that's there. It's Nudge by Richard Thaler, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, and Predictably Irrational by Daniel Riley. So Nudge is policy making, behavioral economics and policy making. Thinking Fast and Slow is psychology and economics. Um, and Predictably Irrational is a lot of case studies and real life scenarios where behavioral economics is applied and can be seen.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here. I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's any feedback, we'll also probably be sending a feedback form. But other than that, if there's something you'd like to discuss, something that you found interesting, or general feedback, anything.
I personally loved every session of yours. I think you're an amazing teacher, and I personally loved behavioral economics. You know, the way you taught was really interesting, especially the paradoxes and case studies. I found it very, very innovative. It was it was an amazing experience. I thought it was like, it wasn't difficult to understand. It was purified to a level where, I'm a beginner. Like, I haven't had any exposure to this. So I was able to understand it without any difficulty. It was like a first level teaching. So it was amazing. Thank you.
I'm glad. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vani. If anyone else wants to say anything, they can. Thanks, Ariza. And otherwise, everyone's free to leave now. It was great 8 classes, and I'm so glad to have taken this.